Well, joining me now to delve into the results in a little bit more detail are a number of people from around the world. John Gazima, who's the Executive Chairman of BAV Consulting, Eduardo, who is the Managing Director of Brand Analytics, and Doreen Wang from Beijing, who is the Director of Millward Brown offices in China. Well, first of all, thank you all very much for joining. I'd like to start really with a general overview. We've seen in this year's rankings the total valuation of the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands pretty much static year on year at about 0.3% of an increase. A lot of that staticness has really come from the fast-growing markets where we've seen a decline in the overall rate of growth of some of the Brazilian and Chinese brands. Eduardo, let's start with you. What are the main factors this year that have caused Brazilian brands to overall decline in value?
Okay, hi David. Something very important to highlight is that in 2011 we saw a huge growth in the total value of the top 50 Brazilian brands. The top 50 Brazilian brands grow almost 50% in 2011, and in 2012 they declined 23%. What happened in reality is that last year we grew a lot, and now there is a lot of expectation about our economy, about our brands, and at the end, due to all financial crisis, due to all capital markets problems, we do have some problems in our brands.
Thanks very much. I think that puts that into context. Doreen Wang, we've seen the latest 5-year Chinese economic plan, and that's put quite a lot of emphasis on Chinese companies to grow both their business and their brands out of China. We've got a new political leadership taking place across China over the next few months. What challenges do you see from a brand perspective of Chinese companies who are clearly large in China becoming big global brands?
David, and as we see in the BrandZ Top 100 brand, there are 13 Chinese brands in the list in this year, 2012. So that's very exciting. But still, and we see two groups of brands. One is the state-owned enterprise, and the other are the private Chinese brands. And those are the brands who have experienced faster growing in their brand value over the past few years. And for the Chinese brands overall, the key challenge, and there are two major key challenges, and one is Chinese brands still lack of a meaningful differentiator, and even in the domestic market in China.
So moving on to looking at some of the differences we're seeing in increasing in values of some of the sectors. There are two sectors that stand out the most in terms of the increase of brand value, both at running at a 13% year-on-year increase, the luxury sector and the fast food sector. John Gazima, what observations can we make about the fast growth of two very different sectors?
I think you can call this the cheeseburger and handbags scenario of 2012. I think really what you're seeing, David, is a perfect example of a bifurcation of markets and also a maturing of consumers. Before the financial crisis, there was, I think a strong emphasis on needing to have the best in everything and excessive spending, debt-fueled consumption that drove about and contributed to a lot of the problems that we had over the last 3 or 4 years. One of the things that we saw in our data coming out of the global financial crisis was one of the fastest growing returning categories was luxury. And as you go into the data, what you start to see is that people are actually spending strategically in categories they value and in brands that they admire.
Doreen Wang, status has always been seen as a bit of a weapon in China and luxury brands as tremendous ammunition. Are we seeing at all a change in the way in which Chinese consumers view the luxury market?
The luxury market in China has been growing very fast over the past decade, and China has become the second largest luxury market. Still the demand for luxury luxury goods in China has been keeping growing, and we have but the key observation is still lots of Chinese consumers are making the final purchase overseas, but the domestic sales, the domestic purchase is also catching up.
John Gazima, we've talked quite a lot about trust and the changing nature of trust. Clearly, one of the biggest building blocks for brands, we see that from our BrandZ data, you see it from the BAV data perspective, is the notion of trust. How do you think trust is holding up in an environment where, to be honest, most consumers trust more their contemporaries through social networking sites than they do big international global brands?
Yeah, you know, David, it's really interesting. We looked both at the BAV data and the BrandZ data, and across the spectrum of both of the studies, what you start to see is sort of one common theme, which is that trust is the new black. I mean, trust is really in style today, and I think it's a definition really of sort of a changing landscape where there's high degrees of cynicism really sorted with easy access to social media, which means that anyone in a nanosecond can figure out whether or not you're supporting your claims or delivering on your customer service.
One of the trends that we're seeing right across the world, and maybe even more with more veracity in fast-growing markets, is how mobile and how social we're all being as consumers. What impact, John, is that having for brands?
So I think every marketer has to be thinking about the trinity of social, mobile, and gaming, because they're becoming so pervasive in culture today.
Well, for the very first time in the history of the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands, we have an African brand in the ranking. John Gazima, what does that say to you about Africa's place in the emerging markets?
It's incredibly exciting. I think, you know, the most hopeful aspirations I think all of us have is that, you know, Africa is going to be the next Asia, and you're going to see tremendous emergence in these brands in these sectors.
Well, African brands might be a new story for the developed markets, but of course China and Latin America have been looking at Africa very closely over the past 5 or 6 years and investing substantially in the growth of Africa. Doreen, what do you see from an African perspective in China?
African market has been perceived as strategically important and for Chinese brands. And African market and the Middle East market, so those are many countries in those markets have long-term and a strong relationship with China.
Well, let's move to the future. And if you all had a working crystal ball, what future do you see for brands?
David, John Kenneth Galbraith said the only value of economic forecasting is to render astrology credible. And so I say that with humility about the future, because if I knew that, I'm not sure I'd be sitting here. But I do think one of the really interesting and important trends that we've seen out of the BAV data is this shift to more values-led consumerism. We found in our data that 72% of people throughout many of the major developed markets were looking for brands and companies whose values aligned with their own. Authenticity, trust, respect, dignity.
Well, thank you all very much for sharing your thoughts and observations and insights with us. John, Doreen and Eduardo, thanks very much for being with us.